Hello, welcome to the DRH show. Today I'm joined by a lecturer from the University of Sussex, Jenny Terry. Thanks for joining me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, great to have you here, Jenny. So if you could just give us a snapshot of your background, your trajectory in life, and how you ended up doing what you're doing.
Oh, my trajectory in life, there's a big question. Okay, so focusing on my sort of education journey and my sort of pathway into academia and what I'm doing now. So it's definitely been non-linear, definitely non-traditional. So I actually started a psychology degree back in, I think, 2003. But for various reasons, including mental health, I withdrew. Ended up working in recruitment for 10 years. I had my daughter, but actually, it got to a point where I thought, no, you've got to go and do the thing that you feel passionate about and really give that a go. And to be honest, I never really had the confidence or really believed I could do it. So I did in the end in 2014. So, quite a bit later in life, I was 32. Went back and did a degree in psychology and sociology, actually, at the University of Brighton. And very, very quickly realised that, this is the thing that I should be doing. I absolutely loved it and wanted to stay in academia. And I've been lucky enough to have been able to do that. So I finished my degree, went on and did a year's master's at the University of Sussex. I was also working in research at the University of Brighton for a couple of years. Did my PG cert, so my higher education teacher training, and then got onto the PhD at Sussex, which I'm still finishing, and was lucky enough to get a position as a lecturer there, a teaching-focused lecturer focused on statistics and psychological methods. I started that in January, so it's all very new and wonderful. So yes, that's my trajectory, how I got to where I am.
Now, Jenny, let's talk about your area of specialization. You mentioned that you fundamentally focus on research methods. Now, a lot of people would say that there's still that, predominant view that psychology is not really a robust science. It's not a soft science. So when there's a course like research methods in psychology, they're quite surprised that there's actually a methodology behind psychology. So for the uninitiated, if you could just give us an overview of what research methods in psychology is all about and why is it important?
Yeah, so yes, I do sometimes get told that psychology isn't a real science. I would disagree with that. I think psychology is trying very hard to be a real science. It is tricky because a lot of the time we are measuring things that aren't tangible. We can't get I was going to say a ruler, but that's a bit basic. But we can't take literal measurements of things, and we're dealing with these sort of woolly constructs. So I think we need to be even more careful about research methods. And I think, this is one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about it. But really, research methods in psychology, it's a bit of an umbrella term. It sort of encompasses everything that we do sort of in the scientific process when we're conducting research. So, this can be from actually designing the study right through to the analysis, however we're doing that, whether it's experimental work or, a survey study, whether it's longitudinal research, whether it's qualitative research, whether we're doing interviews or focus groups or whatever it is. So research methods is all the steps that go into that. And it's incredibly important because it underpins not only the research itself, but all of psychology, all of the psychological knowledge that we have comes from research. So you need to have really robust methods to be able to rely on the findings, on the knowledge that the research produces. And this can obviously have quite serious applied implications. So obviously we need to know that the research we're producing is good enough to inform all sorts of things, whether that's for mental health practice, which I think is, a lot of the times when you talk about psychology, people sort of equate it with mental health. But obviously it's broader than that, whether it's our teaching methods or government policy or, the health advice more generally. It feeds into so many different things. And yeah, I mean, psychology has had, I think, a lot of viewers of your channel may be aware, if they're following psychology, that there was this so-called replication crisis. I say so-called because, not because I don't think there's any problems, but because I don't like the word crisis so much. But, there was the replication crisis, and, finding that a lot of findings in psychology don't replicate and that they aren't robust and reliable. But there is a lot of work going on. There's a lot of researchers that are specifically looking at this and how we can improve things. And that's one of the things that I do and that I'm very, very interested in.
Absolutely. Now, Jenny, actually, I did research methods in psychology during my MSc. And for anyone who actually did that course, there's a good chance that they would have come across the textbook of Dr. Underfield. And I gathered from your website that you were actually supervised by Dr. Underfield. So how does it feel to be supervised by, a textbook author in statistics?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a question that I get asked a lot, actually. People want to know things like what his office is like. There's a lot of Iron Maiden stuff in there, if anybody's wondering. Yeah, so I feel, working with Andy, I feel very privileged, to be honest. Privileged because, I'm working with somebody that shares my passion for wanting to get the stats right, but also because, frankly, he is very well known because he's written this very, very successful textbook, or several very, very successful textbooks, and he is well known. He has a lot of followers on Twitter, so that has been helpful for things like I'm running a big multi-lab study. And actually recruiting people to get involved in that, he just had to send one tweet, and I was inundated. And he's a real champion for not just me, but his other PhD students as well. And he'll go and do a keynote, and he'll feature our work. So we're getting a lot more visibility. It's raising our profiles at the same time. So there's a lot of privilege involved in that, and I'm very, very grateful to have this opportunity. But I think another good thing about working with Andy is that he's one of those supervisors that's he's very down to earth. He's very supportive, very encouraging. Our well-being always comes first. He's the first person to tell me when I need a break, or tell me off if he catches me working when I'm not supposed to be. So he's brilliant on that side. I think the only downsides to working with Andy is that, well, again, my work is more visible, so it's a bit of a double-edged sword. It raises the profile, but that can be a little bit nerve-wracking, knowing that there's so many more experts in my field that are going to be reading my work and probably scrutinizing quite closely what I'm doing. And I think the other thing is everybody expects me to be an expert in stats as well. And I'm not bad at it, obviously, because I'm teaching it and doing it a lot. But yeah, I do tend to get asked a lot of stats questions, and that there is a general assumption that I'm an absolute whiz with it when, I'm not an absolute whiz. I've had to work quite hard to get the level of understanding that I do. And there's still a lot of things I don't know. Still a lot of things Andy doesn't know. It's a very big topic, but yeah, all in all, it's fabulous, and I do feel very lucky.
I was actually quite terrible with stats during my MSc, and I had to rely with those videos. One of them is from Andy's YouTube channel, and they're really very helpful for those who are not statistically gifted, shall we say. Now, let's move on to another aspect of your work, Jenny. I understand you also carried out a pilot study to find out whether fictional narratives can be useful in teaching statistical concepts. So would you mind sharing to us about the findings?
Absolutely. So this links in quite nicely actually with talking about Andy and his textbook, because he wrote, I think in 2016, a book called An Adventure in Statistics, which is a statistics textbook, but it is all embedded in this absolutely wonderful fictional narrative. It's full of zombies and robots and things. It's very futuristic, and there's a romance in it and everything. It's great. But what we wanted to find out, and this is work that I started doing with Andy when I did my master's, what we wanted to try and find out was whether actually embedding statistics in a fictional narrative in this way actually aided comprehension above and beyond an ordinary textbook. So we did a pilot study. This was in 2017, 2018. And our initial findings suggested that actually having it in this sort of storybook style did help people learn the statistics concepts that we included. We included a broad range of things to make sure that it wasn't just working as a one-off. But this was quite a small study. There was quite a small sample. I think we had about 40 people take part. So we need to replicate it, and we are working on doing that at the moment. But the idea behind the research arm of this is that there's evidence to suggest, and a lot of theories around story being something that humans are sort of predisposed to use it in learning. We use sort of stories with our children, and they learn language in someone through this, obviously through the words, but there's various neurological and evolutionary theories that suggest that there's more to it than just picking up the words. Actually having being able to put concepts into this fictional context actually helps us learn. So we were looking at that. We're also quite interested in whether one of the reasons that it can help learning is because, particularly when you're using sort of fun, engaging stories, whether that reduces anxiety. A lot of students are quite anxious about statistics. So does it actually reduce their anxiety, and therefore reduce, the brain fog that sort of comes with that, and allow them to focus more on the actual statistical concepts themselves? So, as I say, our initial findings are positive, but it does need some more work.
We absolutely love a good story. I suppose we just we can remember a gossip, but it's difficult to remember a statistical formula. Maybe that's why it's work. But as you said, this is on a pilot phase, so we'll be excited to hear more about how your research pans out. But to begin with, Jenny, what do you think some people struggle with stats?
Oh, that's one of the $1 million questions. And yeah, again, I think this is an area that needs a lot more research. We need to really understand why it is that people struggle, so that we can help them. I think partly, statistics does have an element of maths to it, and a lot of, I'm thinking about undergraduate students here, particularly psychology students that come to university, that they're not typically like maths students. A lot of them won't have done maths A-level. This is obviously, I'm generalizing. And their focus is wanting to know about psychological theory rather than doing the maths. So, it is quite common for them to have had bad experiences with maths at school, not feel confident, not feel that they have the ability to do something that is mathsy. And I think with statistics, there's another layer of complication there, because it isn't just maths. And in fact, most of the calculations that you would do in statistics, you've got a computer that's doing it for you. You may come across a formula here and there, but by and large, what you're actually doing is different reasoning, logical reasoning, and some of that is quite unintuitive. And I think that there's another layer of complication there that causes students to struggle. And then on top of that, you'll have the students that have maths anxiety or stats anxiety. Whether these two things are different, we'll come on to that later. So if they're anxious about the topic, then this can cause, we don't exactly know the mechanisms, but that there's certainly a correlation that suggests that if you're anxious about something, you're not going to perform as well as you could, and this is because of partly to do with the physiological symptoms of anxiety, but more to do with the it sort of interrupts your cognitive processing, so it can affect working memory and things like that, and cause you to, for example, not do as well on a test, or it could cause you to avoid studying because you're anxious about it, so then you haven't prepared enough for the test. So there's different sort of processes that are going on that could cause that. But yeah, so there are lots of different things that I think are all, it's causing a perfect storm. There's so many different ways or reasons for people to struggle with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the interesting thing here, Jenny, is a lot of people would actually choose psychology to do at university, but thinking that it would not involve less maths, and then when they're already on the third year or fourth year, they realize that there's actually a lot of statistics involved, and I think that's also part of the anxiety that the expectation were not properly set when they choose to do psychology. That it's actually a science, and there's a lot of methodology involved, and statistics is one of those. Now, Jenny, let's move on from numbers to more personal side of what you're doing. I've also understand that you're also a first-gen student, and you're also a mother. So how do you kind of tie this together with what you're doing in academia? Is it more of a challenge being a first-gen student and also being a mother in academia? I could speak being a first-gen student. I'm also a first-gen student myself, but obviously I'm not a mother. How does it work for you?
Yeah, I mean, there are challenges that I think are unique to those things. I don't know. There are a lot of people that I encountered that have various challenges. But I mean, my experience, I think with being a first generation student, for me, I mean, going back to what I was saying earlier about withdrawing from university first time around, a lot of that was because I didn't have the confidence. I didn't believe that I was good enough to get a degree. It was something that happened to other people, other types of people. I didn't believe that I would, even if I got the degree, I didn't believe that I was good enough to then go on and get a job. I wouldn't have a career in psychology, so what was the point in going through this and studying it? That was something that happened to other types of people. So it's not just a first gen issue. I think for me it's a class issue as well. I come from a working class background, so not only did my parents not go to university, hardly any of my peers went to university. No one else in my family went to university. It was just unheard of. So there was no role model there saying, yes, you can do this. People like you do this. you know, and I mean, now looking back, I can see that a lot of that is unfounded. But it felt very, very real. And I wasn't even conscious that that's what it was at the time. It's only looking back that I can sort of piece it together a bit. So for me, first time around, it completely put me off in the first place. And then second time around, I did have to take a bit of a leap of faith, and I remember being terrified in my first semester, thinking, you know, what if I fail? Yeah, I quickly realised that, oh, actually, you know, you might not be so terrible at this. And then it was more to do with the so-called hidden curriculum. So there's aspects of university life, and certainly if you want to make it as a researcher, as an academic, there are things that are helpful to know, that they, you know, they're not widely available. I mean, for example, just the fact that you're able to go up to a lecturer and say, I'm really interested in being a researcher, can I help you with some research? I mean, that just seemed completely bizarre to me. Why would they want me? Why would they let me help? But apparently this was a thing. So yeah, accessing that hidden curriculum, it can hold first gen students back that don't have family members and so on to advise them and you know, encourage them and let them know that there are these opportunities there that you can go and get, because they've been through it before. As for being a single parent, I think the issue is more being a single parent than just being a mother, or really being a parent in general, because you just never stop. That's a time and energy issue. So, you know, I wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and then right through until 10, 11 o'clock in the evening. I don't, there's not an hour to myself. I'm either thinking about what to cook for dinner, or whether my daughter's had a bath, or, you know, things like that, or, you know, I'm dealing with stuff from the school, or I'm working. So that, you know, that it's the mental load of that as well. It can be exhausting. My daughter is now 11, she'll be 12 soon. So that, you know, I'm less involved. You know, I don't have to give her bath anymore, thankfully. But, you know, I still have to. It does stop me being able to be as social as I'd like to be, and getting involved with things at university. You know, if there's certainly back when things were all in person, if there was a talk or a meeting that was on after school hours, or a social, a PhD or postgraduate social in the evenings, you know, I usually couldn't attend. So you don't have the same sense of belonging, I think, and camaraderie, which is so important for not just doing a PhD or a degree, but, you know, just, wow, life in general, really, isn't it? But yeah, I think it can be especially important when you're jumping through the hoops of getting degrees and so on.
I actually quite admire people like you. You're a single parent, you still manage to do your PhD, because I've only got a cat and I still can't get my ethics application sorted. But you're a testament that it can actually be done if you just find the time. But let's move on to your another role, Jenny, because I understand that you're also the chair of Scipak. Now, for those who's not familiar with Scipak, give us a bit of an overview what Scipak is and what does actually your role entails.
Yeah, so Scipak is now, as of last July, a member group of the BPS. It's always been affiliated with the BPS, but now that's official. So Scipak, it's the Psychology Postgraduate Affairs Group, and it is a community of postgraduate psychology researchers, so PhDs, both practitioners and research doctorates, and also master's students. And the group was set up in the 80s. I want to say 1984, but I'd need to fact check that. But in the 80s, so it's been going for a long time. And it was really a way that postgraduate psychologists can connect with one another. There's always been a strong social element to it, but also to generally support that community. So we do things like an annual conference, and the idea of that is, it's quite a low stakes, informal environment. We can come and present our research without worrying that, one of the leaders in our field is going to be there or whatever. We offer a lot of bursaries and grants, supporting financially with research and other costs like going to conferences. We publish a quarterly publication. We do awards and all these wonderful things. So we're really there to support postgraduate psychologists whilst they're doing their postgraduate studies. My role with Scipak, I'm currently the chair. So I have sort of a general, more strategic oversight of what we're doing. Wow, actually, my role for the last year has been managing the merger. So it has been quite administrative. So making sure that all the processes are transitioned over to the new BPS way of doing things, which has been frustrating at times, but we're getting there. So that's basically been what I've been doing mostly. But also, I sit on the BPS research board, so I represent postgraduate psychologists there, and just generally keep things ticking over and get involved in sort of being key to the decision making process. So, for example, we've recently voted to take on an extra core committee role. So we're now going to have an EDI officer. So yeah, sort of doing things like that. So on the way that Scipak is structured, we have, I think, now 6 core committee members. So that's the chair, the vice chair, treasurer, communications officer, info officer, and now the EDI officer. 4 of these roles are about to be vacant. So the EDI officer is new. We are looking to recruit a new information officer, vice chair, and I'm also going to step down as well in July. So we are interested in people that are interested in becoming chair. And then we also have the wider committee. We have, I think, another 48 positions. So the idea is that we have representatives for the different member network groups of the BPS. So they have different sections and different divisions. So it might be educational psychology or forensic psychology or clinical psychology. So we have reps for each of those as well. We do have some vacancies. I haven't got all the details yet. Our Vice Chair Michelle is still putting the list together. But if anyone's interested, then feel free to contact me for more information, and I can let you know what's available. Because as I say, we are actively recruiting at the moment.
And full disclosure, of course, Jenny and I are part of Scipak, and I'm also the rep for the male psychology section. Now, what I'll do, since you mentioned about the vacancies, I'll pop the link to the description notes. So for anyone who might be interested in joining Scipak, taking in a more active role, they could just get in touch with you or anyone from the Scipak committee. Now, Jenny, I understand that there's another thing that you've launched just to kind of solve an advocacy to help people who are interested about statistics. You launched this ROSE network, Researchers of Statistics Education. So tell us more about this.
Yeah, so ROSE, ROSE began as me actually emailing another Scipak member by chance, Lizzie Collins, who was she's the outgoing Scottish branch rep. And she had emailed the Scipak mailing list about some research that she's doing, and it's on sort of misconceptions in statistics. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. That's, similar to what I'm doing. We should be friends. So I emailed her and said, I just started chatting. And at the same time, started chatting to another postgrad that was doing work on statistics anxiety. And we decided to form this little group. And for a while, there was 3 of us. Then we brought Maddie Powell on, who was the previous chair of Scipak. And for a while it was sort of, just us. And then gradually we started adding other people. And then I think it was around the same time as the pandemic, well, when it first hit in the UK, we decided to try and expand the network. So we opened it up, and it's still very, very informal. I mean, we connect, we have a Slack workspace that we connect on. We have sort of lab meetings and so on, but it is still quite informal. But there's about 100 of us now, so it's not just PhD students. We've got everybody from master's students through to professors from, all over the world. And it's just one of the things and one of the reasons that I emailed Lizzie in the first place is that researchers doing stats education stuff in the UK, we tend to be quite siloed. We don't tend to be in big sort of research groups, and often just end up, I don't know, I was feeling a bit lonely. So, I thought maybe this is a problem for more than just us. So we opened it up, and we now have this group. We've been doing research together, collaborating on stuff together. We have these fab lab meetings, and we get to just chat to other people that are doing, similar stuff, similar interests, and discuss our ideas and our work. And yeah, it's been absolutely wonderful to have that network during my PhD for sure, but also just during the pandemic, and just having another way to connect with people through screens. But it has been a bit of a lifesaver.
Absolutely. Now, Jenny, aside from your work within statistics, you've also been quite active when it comes to science communication. So, can you tell us why this is important? And do you have some tips on what kind of science communication can researchers engage with?
Yeah, it's funny actually, because I don't see myself as somebody that does a lot of science communication. I mean, I go on the odd Twitter rant about things. But I think I've got like a folder with about 10 half-written blogs. They just never get finished because it's always quite low down on the priority list. So yeah, I don't know if I do a lot, but I mean, I do think it is important. I think the key for me, especially in writing blogs and having like Scipak and this channel, it's about sort of bringing non-academics, the general public, letting them in on the secret. Like, how can we sort of communicate what it is we're doing in layman's terms. I don't think that research should be gatekept. It's often behind paywalls. It can be very, very expensive to get hold of an article, but if anybody ever wants to read any of my work, feel free to email me and I will send you a copy. Most academics will do that. But yeah, I don't think it should be behind a paywall. But also, even if you do pay and you get the article, there is a lot of jargon in there. So I think SciComm is important in that. And then, to be honest, I think, rightly or wrongly, academics these days sort of using things like Twitter, I don't want to say create a brand. That's probably a little bit cynical even for me. But we do have our own. It gives us a platform to promote our work, but that does tend to be more to the academic audience. But yeah, so there are my thoughts on Psycom. But yeah, I don't think I do it anywhere near as much as I should.
Yeah, I think you do, and the fact that you're sharing some call for papers, or you're sharing some interesting articles about be it statistics or otherwise, it's a form of science communication. And also, I think with Twitter, it's a good platform when it comes to science communication, because just by simply using certain hashtags like PhD chat or hashtag why we do research, you would end up with tons of resources that in itself is already science communication. And as you've rightly pointed out, that science, I suppose, scientists, we don't have to be, I don't know how to phrase it properly, but scientists don't have to be selfish with their findings. And by communicating it, you're actually returning it to the public, because in essence, they're the one who funded your research, because most research are not funded by scientists, they're funded by taxpayers. So there you go. I'm quite sure that a lot of people would find benefit in the kind of science that you do. So just like the link on Scipak, I'll also put that on the description note, the link to your website. Now, Johnny, a lot of your work has centered around statistics. You've done it during your university days, and also right now you're teaching it. So I would imagine you've come across a number of misconceptions about statistics. So let's take this as an opportunity to kind of identify those misconceptions and address them.
Okay, so I'm not going to give you a stats 101. I need like my I need PowerPoints, I need plots and things to deal with this properly. But yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of misconceptions about things like p-values and what they really mean. They're not the probability that your hypothesis is true. It's a bit more complicated than that, unfortunately. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier about how things aren't necessarily intuitive, and why I think a lot of people struggle with it. Similarly, you have the stupid names for things, like a confidence interval. You'd think that means something to do with how confident we can be in a finding. No, nothing to do with that. Not in a frequentist sense, anyway. So, I mean, there are all sorts of misconceptions, and I'm not going to list them all, but I think one of the most important things that I have discovered about statistical misconceptions is it's not limited to students, it's not limited to non-researchers, general public, lay people. It's actually inherent in researchers as well. So this isn't quite my field, but Lizzie Collins, who I mentioned, and Andy's other current PhD student, Martina Sladikova, they are actually researching like the prevalence of certain misconceptions in statistics. So I think Lizzie was looking at p-values and effect sizes and confidence intervals, I believe, and Martina's looking at model assumptions. So robust methods, and what they are finding, as I say, it's not limited to just students and people without statistical training. Even academics, professors, they're making similar mistakes, and the misconceptions are more widespread than we think. So yes, it's a real problem.
I've got a quick question for you, Jenny, but this might probably reveal my knowledge gap when it comes to statistics. Do we really have to use all those sophisticated statistics? What I mean is that, can't we just use Ttest all the time, or do we have to really go with those more sophisticated tests? Because sometimes I just feel like, when you're reading a paper, do they really have to do this particular test? Why can't I just do a simpler one? When, I hate to phrase it this way, because sometimes psychology, especially research in social psychology, is kind of like you kind of expected that result anyway. So why would you choose a complicated statistics to kind of research or to kind of prove something which is almost expected?
I think there's two different issues there. I think in general there's a lot of research where I read it and I go, well, yeah, obviously. That doesn't mean we shouldn't test it. I mean, you know, what we as humans, as naive scientists, just as human beings, intuit about the world isn't necessarily always the way it is. I mean, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but there are very unintuitive findings out there. But then I think the other issue is, you know, should we be, you know, using complex statistical methods for simple problems? Probably not. Not for simple problems. You know, we need to make sure that we're using the right method for the question that we're asking. And sometimes, no, you know, it doesn't need complicated things. Sometimes a Ttest is enough. And then I think researchers know that. I think sometimes, or a lot of researchers know that. I've heard of there being sort of pushback from journals or reviewers saying, oh, well, you know, this is just a Ttest. Why don't you do this other fandangly thing? And actually it isn't really needed. It's just to make it all look a bit more jazzy. So I'm sure, I mean, I think there probably is a temptation to overcomplicate things unnecessarily. But yeah, long live the Ttest is what I say. Keep it simple if you can.
And maybe that's why I'll never be an academic, because I have the tendency to oversimplify things. Yeah, I struggle even with academic writing, let alone statistics. But back to you, Jenny. We've talked about your work within statistics. We've talked about your other aspects of your work. Now let's move on to something more personal, because we're already crawling towards the end of the interview. So let's hear more about the human side of Jenny. So since you started, what would you say are the biggest learning? You kind of alluded to earlier that you struggled with being a first-gen student, but other than those, are there snippets of learning that you've come across along the way of your academic journey?
Yeah, do you know, I've always really struggled to answer this because I have learned so much about so many things. You know, since I came back to university. I mean, it was 7 years ago, 8 years ago, 7 and a bit. So yeah, I mean, I've learned a lot about psychology and a lot about statistics. I've learned a lot about the world and academia and its place in the world, and probably the biggest journey I've been on is almost what I've learned about myself as well, which, you know, I've kind of touched on really when talking about being a first-gen student and coming back as a mature student. So yeah, I honestly, I struggle to have a single answer to that. I think maybe certainly one of the biggest things that I've learned that has impacted the work that I do and the way that I think about science is everything that I've learned about the replication crisis in psychology, and what I've learned about misconceptions about statistics and so on. And I think what that did was made me realise how important statistics education is, because I think that underpins a lot of the other problems that we are having in psychology. And when I started looking into this, and I sort of realized that the research, there is some really good statistics education research out there, but there's not enough. And we need to get this right. We need to be teaching this well, not just for those of us that want to go on and actually become researchers themselves, but also because, I mean, look at what happened during COVID. Every day there was an update on the news. Boris Johnson and co would come out and they'd be presenting this with all these facts and these figures and these charts. And also there's a lot of misinformation out there on social media or whatever. And I think it's really, really important that we provide everybody with sort of some fundamental statistical literacy so that they can understand that and ideally be critical of some of that information where they're needed. So I think the most important thing I've learned, as I say, in terms of my work is that sort of motivating me to do what I do. And then the biggest thing I've learned about myself is just that I actually can do this. I don't always feel that way. Imposter syndrome does have a habit of striking me down every now and again when I least expect it. But, usually I can put that into perspective and keep going. So yes, that's probably two things there.
Yeah, your biggest learnings. Now, Jenny, what would you say are the highlights of your career so far?
Again, this is a tough one too. I think one of the things that I'm most proud of, I actually did when I was an undergraduate, and really actually has nothing to do with, well, it's obviously related to academic work, but it is not directly related to my research. But I was involved in setting up a kind of a mental health support group, or peer support group when I was at Brighton University. So that was run by students in collaboration with the counselling service, and that gave students it gave students somewhere else that they can go for mental health support, and it also gave the students running the course a chance to get some work experience. If they want to go on into counselling psychology or clinical psychology, you need to have this kind of experience. So I was absolutely thrilled to have been able to contribute to that work, get that off the ground, get it up and running, and it is still going. And some of the feedback that I've seen from the students that have taken part has been fab. So that's one of those nice sort of heartwarming things that I was very happy I was able to do. In terms of my own work, a real highlight for me, was getting on the PhD. I mean, I'd applied twice, and I didn't get in either time, but I got in the third time lucky. So that was a huge highlight. There was a lot of stress, shall we say, going on around that. But then since doing the PhD, I think running the multi-lab project that I'm doing has been one of the biggest challenges, for sure. There's so many moving parts, but definitely a highlight. It's been absolutely amazing to work with such a big group of other researchers, and being able to benefit from their knowledge and just make those connections. And again, like I was saying about Rose, about having just connection with people during the pandemic, that was actually really, really helpful. And yeah, just being able to really start, understanding how research works in other countries, or how just the nuances and differences, that when you bring that together, it just creates something even better and more wonderful. So I've thoroughly enjoyed working on that. So that's definitely a highlight. And it did win an award, even though I haven't finished it yet. So that's good.
Absolutely. And Jenny, is there a particular individual or a piece of work which has the greatest influence on how you work, on how you approach things?
There's three papers really that spring to mind. There is a fabulous paper called Measurement from Jessica Flake and I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, but Eco-Free. And it is all about we need to make sure that we're actually measuring what we think we're measuring in psychology. So that is a fab paper, very, very digestible, easy to read. If anyone's interested in psychological measurement, I recommend that. Jessica Flake, she also wrote a paper about the need for multi-lab work in sort of educational measurement, and that sort of ties in very closely with what I'm doing. There was another paper out recently about construct validity, which was actually written by a grad student in the States, which beautifully sums up what I'm trying to do. So some of my work is about the whether maths anxiety and statistics anxiety measures, like questionnaire measures, are actually measuring the same thing, really. And there's a wonderful paper on that. It's Lawson and Robbins. And that was out at the end of last year. So those are papers that have really, really influenced my work. But then, I mean, Andy, obviously an influence. I mean, the way he teaches statistics is a thing, it's a sight to behold. How he can make something like that so fun is always amazing to me. And there's a couple of people at the University of Brighton who really helped me build that confidence. So there's Carl Walker and Stephanie Fleischer, who just believed in me before I did. And if it wasn't for them, and Carl actually gave me my first research assistant opportunity. So then, on the human side, more so than that the actual work that I did or the publication that came out of it, just having someone for the first time ever saying, yeah, of course you can do this. I actually cried on my way home after I asked him about that. So that had a huge, I cannot overstate the impact that had on me. So Carl, you won't be watching, but thank you anyway.
Yeah, well, I hope he does. And Jenny, if you weren't a lecturer, what do you think you would have pursued in life? In another time, in another space, what would Jenny Terry have been?
In a parallel universe, there's a Jenny Terry that's a doctor. There's a Jenny Terry that's a detective. There's a Jenny Terry that's in politics, but she's even more stressed than this version of me. And the things that I really like that motivate me, I like solving complex problems in a way that ultimately helps people. And I think all of those different careers kind of tie into that, as does the work that I'm doing as a researcher. So something like that.
And finally, Jenny, what else is in the pipeline? And if people wanted to reach out to you, what platforms can they get in touch with you at?
Yeah, so what is in the pipeline? I've got to finish this PhD. So I've been working on so many projects all at once. There's going to be a flurry of publications. So do keep an eye on Twitter and on my website for that. So my Twitter handle is @JennyTerry. And my website is jennyterry.co.uk. So I will be promoting the hell out of these things when I finally finish writing them.
Well, all of those links will be on the description note for anyone who wants to get in touch with Jenny. Well, Jenny Terry, soon to be Dr. Jenny Terry, it's a pleasure having you here on the DRH show, but unfortunately, our time is up, but I look forward to hearing more about your work.
Thank you, Dennis. I've really enjoyed it, so thanks again for inviting me.